Hey, ladies and gents, welcome to the Controlled Interest Gamecast, where we talk about video games and everything happening in the industry. Episode 168, the Thanksgiving episode. Gobble, gobble. As always, I'm joined by Jordan.
Jerrad, as always, I'm joined by you, and I just wanted to say that I am thankful to have you here on the show.
I appreciate it. No Dom this week. Had some things come up, but he will be back next week when we talk about the Game Awards and our predictions for what we'll see and what we think might win. We'll also talk a little bit about the whole Death Stranding predicament of it being nominated and its relationship with Jeff Keighley and Kojima and all of that. So stay tuned for next week's episode. This week is going to be a little bit likely of a shorter episode. Not a whole lot of news going on Thanksgiving week, as you would imagine, especially here in the States specifically. In terms of what we've been playing, I am still on the quest to complete the Pokédex for Sword and Shield.
Quest. So, do you know how many individual Pokemon there are in the Sword and Shield decks?
400.
Wow, that's not very many at all.
Nuh-uh. That's why people are upset, because they kind of cut it in half.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's less than half. Everybody's talking shit about the people who are upset. I can actually understand it if it's like less than half the Pokemon. I thought it would have been like, oh, you're not getting every Pokemon, but we'll do most of them. But that's a lot missing.
Yeah. I mean, for a new system and everything, I think it helps it not feel overwhelming, and people can actually, you can reasonably complete the Pokédex, and get the shiny charm and all that stuff. So I'm not too upset about it. I'm currently sitting at, I think, 168 caught. I don't remember how many I've seen, but still working towards that. I'm now in the phase where I'm leveling up the weaker Pokemon. I have a higher level Pokemon that has false swipe, which is really good for catching, because when it hits, it'll never have the Pokemon drop below 1% of health. So it's really good if you go into lower level areas and you have the strong dude, you can just false swipe them and you can catch them real easily. And I'm breeding, some of the other
an
Pokemon.
Actual useful pre-order bonus, which interesting point that I've been thinking about recently, is that most of the time Nintendo doesn't have pre-order bonuses for their games.
Yeah.
But with this one, I got a code for 12 quick balls, and that's always nice having those. If it's a Pokemon like Abra, for example, that you don't want to fight against because then it could teleport away, then you can throw in the quick ball at the beginning of the battle, and it has a higher chance of catching.
Yeah, it's a nice little bonus there. So I'm working my way towards that. Nothing else really to report on Pokemon there. In terms of Jedi Fallen Order, last week we had talked about our progress. You were a little bit further than me, if my memory serves correct.
Yeah.
Since then, I finished everything on the Zepho homeworld. I went to Dathomir, did the stuff that you could do there, right? The little bit of stuff you could do there. Left, went to Kashyyyk, did all of Kashyyyk, finished that, and I'm currently on my way back, or I already flew there and I saved, but after you finish Kashyyyk, you have to go back to the Zepho homeworld, so that's where I'm currently at.
So I just finished going back to the Zepho homeworld, and I'm now on Ordo Eris, I think is how you pronounce it.
Okay.
Which is right after going back to Zepho. Then after Ordo Eris, you go back to Kashyyyk one final time, and then that's when I'm going to Dathomir, because that's when you can totally explore Dathomir without, the Metroidvania stuff getting in your way.
Quick question, and you can choose to not answer this if this information has been revealed, since you're a little bit farther ahead than me in the game.
Okay.
Who do you think the stranger is at Dathomir, the robed stranger?
Yeah, I have not been to Dathomir at all.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So that's the thing, is like, you can't finish Dathomir until you've gone back to Kashyyyk.
Yeah.
I've been to Kashyyyk 2 times, and obviously we've both only been to Kashyyyk once, so once I hit Kashyyyk for the second time after Ordo Eris, then I'll do Dathomir so that I can just do it all in one go.
One thing I did find out, I don't know if, actually, because I don't know if that'd be a spoiler for you. I'll put it this way.
Dathomir stuff is a spoiler for me.
Yeah, this isn't specifically Dathomir. What I will say is there's 2 different ways to unlock something in the game, and one way is kind of lackluster and the other way is pretty rewarding. And the way it's pretty rewarding is if you, from what I've seen and what I've personally experienced, is if you go back to Bogano and explore the areas that are now accessible to you with your force powers that you've gained
So
before
I've
you go
heard
to
about
Dathomir.
this, but I'm not like familiar with the details. So go ahead, don't worry about spoiling. Go ahead and say it.
Okay, so the double-sided lightsaber.
See, I thought that was Dathomir. I thought you went to Dathomir.
No, so that's the
You can-
lackluster way to get it. There's a way you get in
okay.
Dathomir that is like presented with no glitz and glamour, and it's kind of like bleh. Okay, and obviously I don't want to spoil the specifics of having the Dathomir. If you actually go
Which
back
is
to Bogano,
how I'll probably get it, because I don't think I'm going to go back to Bogano.
yeah, so if you go back to Bogano, and you do one of the areas that's now accessible to you via your force push, you can get it in a really cool way. There's a specific story beat that lets you understand why you're attaching it and making a double-sided lightsaber. And it's actually it's not too time consuming either.
Did you do that version?
Yeah, I didn't know that going in. So basically, when I finished Zepho, Seer had made a comment of like, "Hey, with your new force push ability, maybe you want to go back to Bogano and see if you can figure anything else out, right?" So like, okay, she's hinting at that, so maybe I want to go back. So I went back. I looked at all the inaccessible areas. I did a couple of them, and it's obviously some more collectible items for your lightsaber for customizing, yada yada yada. But then one of them specifically, you push across the bridge. It's actually a bridge that's next to the second Ogdo Bogdo that you can fight on Bogano, the one down below with all of the little like white four-legged creature guys around him. It's like right before you get the wall running ability. There's a bridge there that's up in the air, and with your force push, you push it over, you go across, and there's a little area you walk up, and you actually go and find Cordova's like hideout. And there's some story beats in there that lead towards you getting the double-sided lightsaber. And from what I've heard, that's the more fulfilling thing, because people have gone the Dathomir route and been like, wow, that's kind of lackluster and it doesn't really, it's like, okay, cool. Whereas with this one,
can you just tell me the story of how you get it with the Bogano route?
It basically just talks. So on Bogano, the second one you attach to it is actually Cordova's lightsaber. You actually find it there in his abandoned workshop, and they talk. BD1 talks to you about it, and he left it here, and why he, partially why he had to leave, or why he left it here. And it's a really cool moment of Cal putting it together and talking about how, well, if I'm doing this mission for Cordova, I want him to be a part of this in any way he can, yada, yada, yada. And you actually get to attach it that way. Whereas on Dathomir, it's a little less interesting. Yeah.
To me, I think sometimes that's cool if you're super into a game and you want to have your kind of golden path that you go on and get the better ending if you're playing The Witcher or something like that. But I think on this one, I'm just going to take the easy route, maybe look up the cutscene on YouTube from Bogano, but I can totally understand like people wanting kind of a little bit more circumstance around their upgrade to this double-bladed lightsaber.
I didn't know about that going in. It was actually a surprise to me, right? And then I looked it up afterwards. And for me, it was more of a exploration thing. Like, I really enjoy exploring in this game, so I didn't mind going back. And also, I had already been to... I guess, no, I hadn't been to Dathomir because I went afterwards. But going to Dathomir afterwards, in retrospect, I was like, I'm glad I did that personally. But yeah, it's like, it's whether you want to do it or not. It's up to you.
Yep.
In terms of the gameplay, Dathomir does provide a pretty neat difficulty spike. It's not as drastic as people led me to believe. People are like, that's where you'll see the real difficulty. Like, it's harder, but as somebody who's played a lot of, and obviously this game gets compared to from games a lot, I could see why people who don't necessarily play those type of games would consider this specific area much more difficult, right? But it seems to have the same scaling as a From game. So if you actually have a handle on the combat and the force powers and everything, you'll be good to go. Kashyyyk was cool. It's the thing that sucks about Kashyyyk is that planet, at least the first time you go, because I didn't even know you go back a second time, so you had told me that.
Yeah.
The first time you go to Kashyyyk, that whole thing was the marketing for this game entirely. So, I already nothing in Kashyyyk the first time around was new to me.
Gotcha.
Everything was, except for the last fight you have on that little like base with all of the stormtroopers coming down. That's like the only thing in Kashyyyk that wasn't shown. Everything else, when you're releasing the Wookiees inside, a couple of the fights you have, all of that stuff was pretty much already known. So that kind of, I wouldn't say it sucks because it's on me not to watch the marketing and stuff, but yeah, it is what it is, I guess. I don't know what else to say.
Pretty funny to me that we're moving into this next generation in 2020, and still having a lot of trouble making Wookiee fur look decent in a video game. Still having a lot of trouble with that.
Yeah, that's just something I overlook. Cause I'm like, oh yeah, again, Wookiee fur just looks not good. Which is funny because like the characters too never present themselves, and obviously it's a product of the time, so I don't want to hassle it too much. But even the Wookiee suit for Chewbacca doesn't look like real fur. It looks like Wookiee fur, if that makes sense. Like it looks like its own thing. It never really presents itself to me. Even in The Force Awakens or Last Jedi, it never really presents itself to me as real animal fur. I'm always just like, oh, that's Wookiee fur. But yeah, it's a shame that they still can't really nail that. In terms of combat, I'm still loving it. The force push mechanic comes in really handy when you don't really want to deal with enemies because you can just push them off of ledges. But I do like that there are enemies who can't be affected by it, so it doesn't make things necessarily a cakewalk. I did want to talk about the dual-sided lightsaber and the combat with that, but I think I'll actually wait until we've both experienced that so we can bounce our kind of thoughts on it back and forth instead of me just talking about something you haven't had a chance to experience yet. Other than that, I'm enjoying it. Obviously, it's not a super polished game in terms of it still has those video game things we talked about. I know I'm also taking a secondary performance hit because I am playing on the the VCR Xbox One. But I am still enjoying it very much. It's just a really fun game, and it's something that I not necessarily needed, but it felt right at this point of the year to be able to play something that's just pure fun. And in terms of the Star Wars of it, I think it's nailing all of that. I do think, unfortunately, that this also, because of some of those bugs and stuff, knowing Respawn's track record, I still think is a very solid game and it's well built. But that stuff to me is, they were also under the confines of hitting a date for a Star Wars game. You know what I mean? And you can see that it's apparent that this game needed to come out at a certain point.
Another thing I've been thinking about since you mentioned Respawn specifically is that this is a studio since before they were even Respawn was making first-person shooters.
Yeah.
And I think you can really tell, unfortunately, maybe even a little bit more than you could like with Horizon and Guerrilla, even though that was still kind of there, that it was their first real big venture out into, third-person action adventure in both cases. But, for a first-person shooter studio, for the most part, I would say that they do a pretty good job. But I think there is growing pains there when you're jumping over to this entirely new genre.
Yeah, and I think hopefully we'll see jumps in the quality for this new genre they're tackling with the sequel, because there will be a sequel. We're not covering any news this week, but this game sold really well. Shocker, I know. A well-reviewed Star Wars game, even poorly reviewed Star Wars games sell well, so that's no shocker there. It's just one of those games that, because obviously I think you and Dom are more, I guess diehard wouldn't be the right word, but deeper Star Wars fans than I am. It's just one of those games that I don't want to talk about a lot of the narrative until we're all finished, which will likely be after holiday break, or not necessarily finished, but we all have an understanding of the story. And we've already kind of talked about the combat, so there's not much left for me to say until after we come back from holiday break for that. And those are pretty much the only two games I played. So what about you? What did you tackle this week?
As far as games, I would say those are the only two I played as well: Pokemon
Okay.
and Jedi Fallen Order. Played, I would say, a decent amount of both. Pokemon, I have 5 badges, I think. Um, and I think I'm between like 15 and 20 hours in playtime. Um, I would say most of my comments from last week I would stick with, um, but I'm still having fun with it, even though it's, I don't know if disappointment is the right word because it is a solid game, but I would have liked to see a little bit more, even though it is kind of their first outing on a console. I still think there's some things that they could have tightened up, character animations and some Pokemon design stuff like that. But
One cool thing to know, real quick, is
sure.
after looking at the gym leaders for both Sword and Shield, Shield definitely has the better gym leaders. So we pretty much have,
I did that one.
yeah, so we pretty much have 6 trainers that are the same, but the
Okay.
difference is that you have a ghost trainer instead of a fighting trainer,
Right.
which is, I think, cooler. I like the fighting gym leader, but in terms of a type for a gym, we don't necessarily see ghost all that often. We see fighting quite a bit. And the
Sure.
other one is instead of the ground gym leader, who's also a very common type gym leader, that version has the ice gym leader, who also happens to be the only gym leader in that entire game that has a complete team of either Galar native Pokemon or Galarian form Pokemon. Meaning that
Hmm.
every other gym leader in the game has at least one or multiples or most of their team consisting of previous gen Pokemon that look exactly the same that don't have a Galarian form, and they only maybe have one Galarian Pokemon or Galarian form Pokemon. So overall,
Yo,
Shield has the better grouping of gym leaders.
shout out to Galarian Ponyta, which is straight up just My Little
My Little
Pony.
Pony. Yeah.
Like, holy fuck. Um,
Way to get that young
so
girl demographic, man. They nailed it.
one other thing is, I think last week you talked a little bit about like quality of life type of stuff. And for me, this is kind of a situation like Borderlands 3, where yes, they did bring some of that stuff in to the series with this game, this most recent game, but I feel like they could have done more. And one thing that I would really like to see, which is, I would say, pretty much commonplace in modern RPGs at this point, Japanese RPGs, I should say, which is in turn-based stuff, which is um, kind of a fast forward button for battles, and I feel like they kind of get that training needs to be a little bit more convenient and a little less grindy. That's why your Pokemon are leveling up alongside each other as opposed to one by one. So certain things like that I would like to see more of.
So in
I know
Sun
you
and
got a
Moon,
you
sorry,
have a bike in this game, but the jogging to me is still pretty slow. I would like to be able to actually run like you could in previous Pokemon games. Some things to kind of speed things up along the way, since it is, there's still a grindy nature to it, regardless.
in Sun and Moon, you can speed up battles, like the battle speed.
Right,
You can speed all that up.
right.
I don't know if that option is actually available in this game. I haven't even
Yeah,
looked.
I don't think it is.
Yeah.
And certainly not in the options menu that I've seen, and I've obviously looked because that's something I'm big on. So, yeah, it's still certainly fun, and I'm glad that we have a Pokemon game on the Switch. I would say is really my biggest thing about this game. Um, Are you? Do you think that you'll jump into a Ultra Sword, Ultra Shield type of thing next year?
Um, those are tough because the third games have really been hit or miss in terms of the changes they make in it
Yeah.
and the differences that make it worthy of playing. I
If they're
think for
doing the swapping out the gym leaders like you were talking about last week, will you be down?
I think so. I mean, it also depends on where it hits in the year with other releases and
Right.
how close it is to next gen because that's going to be a pricey time for me too.
Sure.
Um, but let's say it's a perfect time for it to release, and we hear about the new gym leader changes, and maybe there's an additional because usually those third games have an additional like post game story. I'll be in.
Right.
I'll be in to tackle it again. The funny thing too with this
So you're
game is,
probably, I guess, because they're probably going to do the stuff that you're looking for.
yeah, probably, and who knows if they even make a third one, because they've skipped points where they've done a third game in the series, but
Yeah, I think it's pretty likely with this one.
yeah. The funny thing too with you saying, this is the obviously the first mainline Pokemon game on Switch. I think people are a little bit more forgiving of it because of the Let's Go games coming out first. Which for people who want more changes to the franchise and for it to progress more towards a modern age of JRPGs, I think that was one of the biggest detriments towards it, because in terms of fan feedback, because Let's Go came out and hardcore fans were like, "Yeah, this is whatever. It's baby's first Pokemon." And then this game comes out, and yeah, there's the complaints about the national decks and all of that, but they're like, at least this isn't Let's Go, because there was a large contingent of the fan base that was worried that Let's Go was going to be the future of Pokemon games, right? Which would have been terrible, because the complaints that are all justified for Sword and Shield, it's head and shoulders above what Let's Go is doing, which is funny because Pokemon Sword and Shield is so far behind from what it should be. But yeah, I think Let's Go had a huge play in people being a little bit more thankful for Sword and Shield that it wasn't Let's Go. Yeah. What about Jedi Fallen Order? You have anything you want to talk about?
Yeah, so just a couple things to add on to what we talked about a minute ago. Like I said, I just finished my return to Zepho. And so, yeah, I think we've probably played it about the same amount, Jerrad, since you've been to Dothamir.
Okay.
But I guess, yeah, it's kind of weird because of the optional pathing. But anyways, I was kind of glad to hear that I wasn't the only one kind of upset with the not only glitches and kind of video gamey bullshit that came with the game, but also just the a little bit of the minutia of the game that was a little bit wonky, not quite there for me, which is usually I feel kind of alone in a lot of conversations with games about like I said, the minutia of what I feel like is wrong with the game. But it feels like other people are kind of agreeing with me on this one, that this game is close, but it's not all the way there, in the sense that partly that means polish. Part of that is the just overall gameplay, the combat, all those sorts of things. So yeah, I'm still enjoying it quite a bit. I will say, as someone who is quite a deep Star Wars fan, as you mentioned earlier, it is hitting a lot of those lore aspects that I am enjoying quite a bit. Some of the deeper stuff and some of the more mystic aspects of the Star Wars universe, which is something that we have been really, really missing since Disney took over, and even a lot in the prequel era with George Lucas. I think we could have had a lot more of that, and stuff like Clone Wars has been keeping that alive. So I appreciate that part of the game quite a bit, and just the story in general I think is pretty solid. I do think it looks pretty damn good. When it looks good, it certainly has its moments. But the lightsaber being swung around and stuff like that, there are a lot of beautiful moments in and out of cutscenes.
Holding up your lightsaber in the dark, so cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of great stuff in this game. A lot of great Star Wars stuff in this game, like you said. Stuff that's just getting to be a Jedi. There's a lot of cool aspects of that. So like you said, I'm also excited to see where we go with a possible sequel or probable sequel, because I do think that as I mentioned earlier, there could be growing pains here with this being Respawn's first time stepping out of first-person shooters and into third-person action. So I would like to see where they go from here, and I think it's a pretty damn good start. Also, shout out to the Inquisitors. I really like that they're a big part of the villainy of this game. I think that they're originally from Star Wars Rebels, and that's another really cool lore aspect of the Star Wars universe. So I like that they're being incorporated here. That little piece. So,
Real quick, we can both assume, neither of us have finished the game, we can both assume Cal probably lives because he's the main character of the game.
Yes.
Obviously. The reason I wanted to start with that is, what do you think the chances are of us possibly getting a Disney Plus series with him leading it, as the person who plays him is a live action actor, and not just a voice actor? What do you think the prospects are of that? Obviously, neither of us have finished the story, so we don't know where we sit on him as a character by the end of his journey in this game.
Yeah.
But just generally speaking, I guess, would you be open to that at this current moment?
I would be open to it. I think that there's way more, plenty of interesting characters out there that I would want to see before him.
Yeah.
And also plenty of ideas for characters that you could go with. Cal is, serving his purpose in this whole Fallen Order scenario where he is an escaped Padawan from Order 66, but that's not even the first time that's been told. It's very similar to Kanan from Star Wars Rebels, who is a very similar situation with his Jedi Master dying in Order 66. So, I think that there's other people, and also I think there's other characters that are much more likely to get their own series. If anything, since he already has his thing that he stars in, which is this, big budget video game series that we have now, I think if anything, he would be, for live action, maybe, most likely I could see him in jumping over to an animated series, but now that we have live action Star Wars stuff, that brings something different into the conversation. But I could see him, Cal just popping up, or maybe some characters from Fallen Order, Seer or whoever, popping up in other Star Wars media that isn't just a comic or a novel, because of course they're going to pop up there. But yeah, I would like to see other Star Wars Disney Plus series before the Cal Kestis stuff. And also, personally, I would kind of like to see the next game have a different protagonist. I think that would be really cool. And maybe Cal's a big part of it. But you could either... Maybe it would be retreading too much old ground. I mean, you could do another escaped Padawan that takes a totally different path and goes to totally different planets. But you could also just have another Jedi... Maybe it's a master that survived, or who the fuck ever, that is just kind of picking up the story where this one leaves off. And like I said, maybe Cal pops up, but I would love to see other Jedi, possibly a different protagonist.
Yeah, because that's the franchise essentially. It's Star Wars Jedi semicolon
right,
whatever.
Star Wars
right?
Jedi. This is this alien chick story now. She's the Star Wars Jedi that we're focusing on.
Yeah, it'd be cool because there's always this the trouble in sequels of, well, you have to depower the main protagonist again so you can make the journey fulfilling. So instead of doing some weird hokey thing with Cal where he loses his powers, maybe he is supervising another upcoming Jedi. So that'd be interesting.
Yeah. And they already did kind of a weird thing where he's a little bit older of a Padawan, to where he already had a lot of powers, but they actually depowered him right before the game starts, kind of.
Yeah.
And then you're building back up even in the first game. So instead of just building up the first game and then rebuilding the second game, you're really already rebuilding in the first game, and that might be weird for a whole second time.
It would be cool if Seer and Grease were the connective tissue and Cal pops up, but because their mission is looking for other Padawan and these lost children, they could be the connective tissue between the games and the series. Who knows?
I would say, without spoiling anything, I think the most interesting part of the story for me is Seer and her kind of involvement with the Jedi and the Force, and her story with that whole Order 66 situation. So seeing her being the connective tissue, like you said, could be very cool.
Her prequel comic series is really interesting as well, that came out Dark
Oh
Temple
yeah,
or something like that.
you
It's
read
like
it?
5 issues. The last issue I don't believe has come out yet, but the first 4
Okay.
I've read. Yeah.
So yeah, if I finish up the game still with positive attitude, and you're saying that comic series is good, I might go back around for it. There's a lot of Star Wars comic book miniseries that come out, so you kind of have to wait and see what people say is good. You know.
Yeah, and for me, I haven't read any of them at all. But when I saw this one was a prequel series, I was like, it's only 5 issues. I'm already interested in this game. Might as well. Yeah, just one of
Yeah.
those things. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we head to the topic of the show?
I can give some shout outs here. I do want to talk a little bit about Star Wars Clone Wars that I've been watching while I play Pokemon on my second screen. And, it's not perfect animation, but it is high quality 3D CG. And it is, certainly bigger budget than the two 3D CG Star Wars series that have come since then, which is Rebels and Resistance. It's weird how they've kind of like stair stepped down in quality each time, but yeah, it's a fun series. If you are super into Star Wars, I probably wouldn't recommend it for you, Jared, but I think Dom said that he had already finished it, so I think he's more of the target audience. But if you are super into Star Wars and you are into the deeper lore, and the characters that aren't necessarily part of the Skywalker saga mainline films. There's a lot of cool stuff in there, and there's plenty of goofy kid stuff as well. Same with the music. There's a lot of really good Star Wars music in there. There's a lot of kind of goofy, cartoony stuff in there, but generally, I think it's a really solid series for it being 6 seasons and a movie. Shout out to Community. And now we're jumping into season 7 with Disney Plus next year. I think that this is certainly one of the better or best pieces of Star Wars media outside of any of the movies, I would say. And not only Star Wars, the Clone Wars, the 3D series, but also Genndy Tartakovsky's 2D micro series, which precedes it, and it's kind of a spin-off of, which I think, this is tough to say, but it is absolutely the 2D series is one of my favorite pieces of Star Wars media of all time, with it being a micro series of 3 to 5 minute shorts mostly that are woven together into these two basically like hour-long movies. It's really well done. If you like the animation style of Genndy Tartakovsky on Cartoon Network with stuff like Samurai Jack and Dexter's Laboratory, then this will be right up your alley. And it's a lot of that cool Star Wars lore stuff. You get the introduction to Asajj Ventress, one of my favorite characters, and also General Grievous, interestingly enough. So, lots of cool Star Wars stuff, both new and old, I guess you could say. And obviously had a rocky couple years with Star Wars, me personally, but I'm enjoying this stuff right now and really hoping for the best on episode 9. So we'll see about that. Other quick shout outs. Gotta give a shout out to Darker Than Black, the anime series, which is one of my favorites, if not my favorite of all time. It's got 2 seasons and a 4-part OVA interstitial between the two, and it is, Jared, I think you'd actually really enjoy this series. It's about this event that takes place in these gates. They call them gates. Open up in, I think, Tokyo and Brazil, like South America. And basically, this event, this occurrence, gives people superpowers, essentially, and they're called contractors in this world. And so a big part of it is that there's this thing called the Syndicate that controls these contractors and sends them out on missions. And it's this interconnected network around the world. And then there's other organizations that are warring against them as well. And then there's also dolls, which are a little bit like contractors. Their superpowers are a little bit different, but they're a lot of times trackers that can use like water or different things to track people essentially. And the contractors are kind of losing their humanity, it seems like, because of the powers that they've gained. They have really cool powers, but then they also have these really cool things called payments, where it's like this really great consequence of having this awesome power, where each individual person has a different power, but they also have a different payment. So there's some people that have to smoke a cigarette when they use their powers. There's some people that have to. There's this chick that has to start yanking out her hair when she uses her powers. There's people that eat, people that write poetry, random shit, right? And it's just a really cool concept and a lot of cool characters. So it's animated by Bones, which I've talked a ton about. Them being, I think, probably the best animation studio in Japan, and having made probably the best, I think, looking anime of all time in Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. This was before that, so it's not quite as good looking, but it still is a great looking anime and is very cool. Has a lot of the superhero, like American superhero stuff, but with this whole espionage filter over it, and is between both seasons and the OVAs, it's like 40 episodes, I think, so it's not anything too big to undertake. But is, like I said, it's one of my favorites. It's really well done. The music is fantastic. Some of the best music in any anime I've ever heard. A lot of like really cool Japanese jazz and kind of like soul funk stuff that they have going on. But a real big focus on jazz, and I really appreciate that part of it. So big shout out to Darker Than Black. And like I said, Jared, I'd recommend it to you if the superhero part of it is any interest.
Is it dubbed?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
Yeah, I'm rewatching it, and I usually don't rewatch anime that aren't dubbed because, not with this one, but most of the time if I'm rewatching something, it's kind of like a passive watch. I'm not as focused. I might be playing games or whatever, but yeah, this one's just so good. Like I said, one of my favorites, so I'm just going through it actively. But yeah, it's got a solid dub for sure. And then quick shout outs to Yu Yu Hakusho, which is an older 90s, I think, anime, which is about a spirit detective is what he's called, and he deals with demons. The kid basically dies and has to, from the afterlife, fight demons and magical beings of all different sorts. It's a really cool show. Definitely an anime classic. Shout out to Bill and Ted, both movies. I watched those. Excellent Adventure and Bogus Journey. Definitely some goofy fun times to be had there, and if they do a third one, I'll check it out. And then lastly, I watched the season 2 premiere of Titans, which we talked a little bit about before the show, Jared. I think I'm actually going to be watching this one a little bit more passively as well, probably while I'm playing Pokemon or something like that in the background, because I was hoping for more of an improvement from season 1 to 2, and as far as what I can tell from the premiere, it doesn't seem like I was hoping they were going less in the direction of like the CW Arrowverse level of quality, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. Because I felt like with season 1 they had a chance to rise above that, but man, for whatever reason, it feels like live action comic book adaptations for the most part on TV are really caught in that sphere of the Arrowverse level of quality. This is certainly better, but it's still like I don't think season 2 episode 1 was a good episode for the show. I think season 1 has plenty of way better episodes, but it was still not quite where I was hoping. So like I said, I may just watch it the rest of the season in the background, even though we are getting season 3 out here. So
yeah, who knows if that comes to DC Universe or the HBO Max thing.
HBO Max, yeah, whatever.
This one, who the hell knows? Is it everything, Jordan?
Yeah. Do you want to just go ahead and tell me your thoughts on Titan season 2, so I can kind of just, because it's not gonna upset me, or you don't even really need to worry about spoiling me. It's like there's plenty of like Teen Titan stuff for me to love and cherish, comics and the animated show. So if this one isn't, the fucking masterpiece that I would love for it to be, then that's okay.
So, as somebody who had a lot of issues with the first season, if you remember,
right. I liked the first season. I definitely didn't love it, but I think it had some great parts to it.
It actually got better, I think, as the season went along too. Whereas season 2 gets worse as it goes along.
Oh no! It starts off this way and gets worse.
The writing takes a nosedive off a cliff, real bad.
That's the first thing I noticed with season 2, episode 1. I was like, man, the writing wasn't perfect in season 1, and season 1 premiere did not have great writing, but they got there, and I was hoping that they were going to continue on rising up, but season 2, episode 1 did not have great writing.
I think if I can remember correctly, because I'm already near the end of the season, obviously, episodes 2 through 5 or 6, it gets to where season 2 was at its best, which, like you said, isn't great writing, but it's serviceable, right? Then
season
after that point, then after that point, it takes a nosedive. There's some really questionable writing in the show. There's some decision making. There's these whole scenes involving Bruce Wayne, which you would think would be cool, but they don't make any sense.
With
Ian Glenn.
What's his name from Game of Thrones? Yep.
Yeah. I mean, his whole accent throughout the show is up and down. It's that casting decision I think was poor.
He's not an American playing Bruce Wayne.
Well, even his New York accent sounds like he's British. It's very odd.
Wow.
He's trying to do a New York accent, but it still sounds British. And it's just because he has such an authentic, unique voice. It's very hard. I think the casting was bad. Not that he's a bad actor. I think he's a great actor. But he's a terrible choice for Bruce Wayne. There's some scenes in there where he meets with some of the Titans at a diner for no particular reason. No thought is given to why he's meeting with them, why he picked this specific location, what it means, what the whole point of it. It's bad. It's like taking a huge... The silver lining through season 2 is they do some cool things with Dick. Take that out of context. And they do an interesting little origin to why he becomes Nighthawk and why it's a blue bird and why Nightwing and why it's a blue bird and that whole situation. But it's completely surrounded by bad writing. I think the girl who I gave a lot of crap for in season 1 that plays Raven steps up her acting in season 2, so I want to give praise where praise is due. But the writing is just so bad. They underutilize Gar. They introduce Connor, and you start to fall in love with Connor because the person they cast for it feels like he's Connor, right? He's strong, but he still looks young, super fitting. He looks like he can be made from Superman's DNA.
Connor being Superboy.
Exactly. Then they completely write him away from the show, and you don't see him for 4 episodes. It's just poorly written and conceived, and hopefully it comes back with strong in season 3 because they're gonna end with the reveal of, Dick in his Nightwing costume, and that'll be the end of season 2. But yeah.
So, which should have been the end of season 1? Should have been this end of episode 1, season 1. He should have just already been Nightwing. But anyways, especially with there being a Jason Todd Robin in the show, it's why are there 2 Robins? Anyways, for you, Jerrad, would you say season 2 was worth watching / will you be going for season 3?
So if season 2 ends up being on if season 3 ends up being on DC Universe and it releases any time that the next Young Justice season is coming out, I'll most likely be watching it because I'm already subscribed, right? But if it releases on HBO Max and it doesn't come to by that time if DC Universe is canceled or whatever happens with it, probably not. Just because the characters that I would be willing to stick around for in the show, it's not even that some of them are being poorly written, it's that they're completely being forgotten about. You know what I mean? So it's different if I was watching it because there were some characters I can attach to as an anchor point, right? And it's like, yeah, everything going else around it isn't great, but at least I have that anchor point and I enjoy this character. With this, it's like they're not even letting my favorite characters even have a chance to speak. So what's the point, you know? So
That always sucks when you're like, where's my guy? Where's my girl? Like, where are these characters I love that are just like written off of this show or whatever?
exactly. Let's hop into the topic real quick before we close out. You're going to be listening to this after Thanksgiving happens because this gets uploaded on Sunday, and obviously Thanksgiving happens on a Thursday. So, with that being said, hopefully you had a good Thanksgiving. I just really wanted to mention for both of us a game, a franchise, and a developer we're thankful for. And we don't need to go on long discussions about it. We can be quick. What I'll say is game, Pokemon Red and Blue is the game I'm most thankful for because that got me into video games in a way that nothing else really had. I had played Blitz on N64 and I'd even played Mario 64, but those games, A, wasn't my console, and B, they were like, oh, I'll pick that up and play for 15 minutes and then never think about it, right? But when I got my Game Boy and I got Pokemon Red and Blue, it really hooked me in a sense of like, oh, I can cater a game to my experience and it can be my adventure. And ever since then, I've loved video games. Obviously, for our generation, that's a huge touchstone in video games is that first Pokemon game. In terms of franchise, I would say Mass Effect. Because in the same way that Pokemon made it so I fell in love with video games, Mass Effect made sure I stayed in love with video games. So around that time when the first Mass Effect... Yeah, around the time that the first Mass Effect game released, I wasn't necessarily waning on video games, but that era was kind of stale, where there was a lot of sameness, you know, with protagonists and just stories, and it just didn't feel like it was necessarily going anywhere. And I just didn't know if I was going to have a new, refreshing experience. I was going to reinvigorate my love for video games if they were all just going to be third-person action games or, you know, whatever. So when I first played Mass Effect, I was like, whoa, this is incredible. And I got the same feeling I did with Pokemon where like, there's this big, vast open world. I can cater this adventure to myself. I love sci-fi, so it's doing all these really cool things. Obviously, I didn't do combat necessarily perfect, but I really love that game. And Mass Effect 2 is probably the most hyped I've ever been for a video game release ever, period, point blank.
Whoa,
and the great thing is that game actually met my expectations. You know, that's my favorite game of all time. I love it. Aped the structure of the storytelling from so many things before it. Of, you know, you're gathering your crew together, you build relationships with them through individual missions, and you learn more about each of those characters, and you can build bonds with those characters. Some of them can die, some of them can live.
Bonds.
Exactly. I think the boss fight at the end of Mass Effect 2 isn't great, but I do think it gets a worse rap than it deserves. People are like, oh, it's one of the worst boss fights ever. It's like, it's a weird, janky, like, Terminator fight. But even then, I would argue it's probably the best Terminator boss fight in video games ever. Because, you know, Terminator games haven't really had great video games. Haven't really had a lot of great movies from what I've heard either. Outside of the first two. Anyways. Yeah, so Mass Effect, I would say, is the franchise I'm most thankful for. And the developer, I would say, From Software, and they fall in line with the kind of the third rejuvenation of this. I wasn't at the point I was with Mass Effect where I was like, oh, am I still going to continue playing games? I was like, I'm going to continue playing games for the rest of my life. But it gave me a different type of experience I didn't know I loved, right? I had never played a game like Dark Souls where it was challenging, but to me very, very rewarding. And it wasn't the cookie cutter difficulties we see in games. It, you know, held no punches. It had these really cool boss fights. The art style and the world was just, it reminded me so much of the darkest parts of Lord of the Rings, which I love. And obviously to get Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3 and even Sekiro now. I have Bloodborne. I can't wait to get to it. It's my next From game I'm going to play. I think I'll have time to play it before Elden Ring comes out, which is good. But I just like that they introduced me to a type of game that I didn't know I would love and be considered, for me, one of my favorite types of games. The mix of the very tight combat and the Metroidvania exploration to it. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, those three things are probably the things I'm most thankful for, and who knows if that'll change in the future. What about you?
Okay, so game franchise and developer,
Game,
correct?
franchise, and developer. Yeah.
Cool, cool. Okay, so I'm gonna go with developer first, actually, which is Sucker Punch, a first-party Sony studio that is based near Seattle and created not only Sly Cooper franchise, but also the infamous franchise, and now we're looking at possibly the Ghost of Tsushima franchise, if you will, on PS4 and 5 beyond, who knows. So, Sly Cooper, when I was a kid, was an incredible series for me that is so artistically done, and I really appreciate that aspect of it. Also love the gameplay. And then, of course, I've talked about Infamous tons of times on this show and how much I love that series. And now looking at this, ninja samurai style game that we're about to get with Ghost of Tsushima next year, I am absolutely hyped for that. It's one of, if not my most hyped games, and I would say that, this is Sucker Punch is probably my favorite video game studio, so I am certainly very thankful for them and all the awesome games that they've brought forth, specifically the fact that they seem to really respect gameplay above all. Maybe they don't always have the best stories, especially Infamous games, but nonetheless they are dynamite to play, and I appreciate that immensely about their games. So here's to Ghost of Tsushima, hoping that's great next year. If there's a single game, let's see. Shoot. There's just so many, Jared. There's so many games.
You got to choose one.
Oh, I know. I will say, big surprise here, Jared. The Witcher 3: The Wild Hunt.
That's what I expected.
The reason that I talk about this game so much, and the reason that I want to talk about it here, being thankful for it, is because it defined a generation, that being this generation, in a way that no game has done before for me. I tend to have so many various and diverse experiences throughout a generation that they don't necessarily blend together, but it becomes more of a spectrum of feeling when I think about a certain generation as opposed to, this game, right? But I can remember when The Witcher 3 was about to come out, and I was, playing through Witcher 2, really enjoyed that game, loved that as well. But they were talking about how you could pretty easily put 200 hours into The Witcher 3's story. And so I decided to go ahead and do that, and did as much as I possibly could. I didn't necessarily 100% the game, but I picked up every quest that I could and completed all of them, and side quest, main quest, whatever, and certainly explored plenty of corners of that game, 90% plus, and saw just about everything that it has to offer, to the point of not necessarily worrying about whatever little crevice I might have missed. But regardless, I think it is just such a special game, and has both it and Witcher 2 have brought me into The Witcher in a way that I didn't expect to really love something when it comes to the fantasy novels. And now we've got the adaptation on Netflix coming in less than a month that I'm also really excited about. So yeah, The Witcher 3 is goofily enough, or goofy enough, I guess it is to say. It's more than just a single game for me, but it is a very special game singularly as well. So I talk about it all the time, bring it up when we do little things like this constantly, but it is that fucking special, and I am certainly excited to see what CD Projekt does with Cyberpunk next year. So shout out to that. Quick shout out. And then franchise, correct? That's the last one. So let's say a little bit different from what you did, since you said Pokemon Red and Blue were your specific game, correct?
Yeah.
You were thankful for. So I will say, as a franchise, I am thankful for Pokemon. I know that it has not necessarily evolved. We were talking about the sort of pace that it evolves at is not necessarily what we're usually looking for in the mainline series, right, Jerrad? We would like it to move a little bit forward, and certainly would have.
Someone describe it as glacial.
Yeah, it is. It is certainly glacial, but nonetheless, they make solid games. I think we can agree on that, right? And there's something to be said for that, because even series that don't happen to evolve very often or at a pace that their fans would like them to, even they sometimes can't always release a solid game. And throughout the years, whether I've hopped into the generation or stayed on the sidelines and let people like you go for the games, there's always been a Pokemon game since, like you were talking about, Red and Blue were the ones that taught me how to read. I was encouraged to learn how to read just so that I could understand this cool new game that I had on my Game Boy Color back in the day. So the Pokemon franchise is obviously very special, like you said, to a lot of people our age, and is special to a lot of people of all ages. So we now have the live action Detective Pikachu movie, which is really cool. We have obviously Pokemon Sword and Shield on Switch. The anime is still going strong after 22 seasons, I think. So it is clearly a very special franchise, right?
The movies that used to be events for us as kids.
Right. Yeah. And they still have solid animated films coming out with I Choose You and stuff like that. So the Pokemon franchise, you could say, is in a pretty decent spot. Yes, we'd like it to grow a little bit more, and I would like to see it accommodate the adults that have been with it for so long. Now, I don't necessarily need something dark and gritty, because I do think it does fit an all ages vibe probably best, but I feel like there could be some really cool stuff in the future. Hopefully, maybe they'll come around a little bit more and give us that have been with it for so long a little bit more of a nod. So the Pokemon franchise, though it's not my favorite, I would say, and though I'm not always dying to play the current Pokemon game, there's certainly been many generations that I have jumped in on and have watched plenty of the anime and the movies and the Detective Pikachu and all this. So I'm certainly a gigantic fan, even though I may not be like super hardcore like you, Jerrad, or the stats people that are out there finding shinies and shit like that. I can certainly say that I am a massive fan of the series, so very thankful for the Pokemon franchise.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Excuse me. You guys are listening to this after Thanksgiving, so hopefully everyone out there that hears this had a good Thanksgiving.
Thankful.
I want to say I'm thankful for being able to do this podcast every week, or at least we try to hit every week. We miss sometimes.
Jerrad,
but
I've said it once and I'll say it again. We're thankful for having you here.
If you can, please follow us on iTunes. Leave us a review. It helps us move up in the algorithm there, and more people can see the podcast and listen to it. If you can go to YouTube, search Controlled Interest, will pop up. Subscribe, hit the like button if you enjoy our podcast, and hit the notification bell so you don't have to worry about dealing with these YouTube subscription box, and you'll know whenever a new podcast goes up, usually on Sundays at 8 a.m. Lastly, go to Twitter, search CTRLINT, that's Controlled Interest abbreviated. We should pop up there. And individually, you can follow me at Jerrad _. You can follow Dom, who's not with us today, at Dom's Oreos, and you can follow Jordan at Melomotus. We will catch you guys next week when we go over our Game Awards predictions. See you then. Bye.